They say a mother's love knows no bounds, but sometimes that boundless love collides with the harsh reality that those we cherish most can hurt us the deepest. My name is Eleanor Winters, and at 64 years old, I discovered that decades of maternal devotion had earned me nothing but a rushed goodbye at a hospital exit and a son who couldn't spare 5 minutes to make sure I got home safely after surgery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day everything changed wasn't when my son Cameron forgot my birthday for the 3rd year running. It wasn't when he borrowed my credit card to pay for a vacation he couldn't afford. It wasn't even when he and his wife Vanessa started making excuses about why I couldn't see my grandchildren more than once a month. No, the moment I realized the true nature of my relationship with my son was on a rainy Tuesday in April, as I sat in a wheelchair at Pinecrest Memorial Hospital's discharge area, still groggy from anesthesia, waiting for Cameron to pull the car around after my knee replacement surgery. "Mom, can you hurry it up?" he called through the automatic doors, not even bothering to come inside fully. "I've got an important client meeting in an hour, and Vanessa needs the car by 3. The nurse pushing my wheelchair gave me a sympathetic glance as Cameron checked his watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. I fumbled with my belongings, a small overnight bag, my purse, and the folder containing my discharge papers and physical therapy instructions. "Sorry, dear," I said, trying to move faster despite the pain medication making my fingers clumsy. The doctor wanted to go over a few extra things about my recovery. "Well, you could have texted me to come later then," he replied, impatience edging his voice. "You know how crucial this meeting is. It could mean a promotion." Every meeting was crucial. Every promotion was just around the corner. Every inconvenience I caused was another obstacle in my son's path to the success he felt entitled to. As the nurse helped me into Cameron's sleek black BMW, a car I'd contributed the down payment for as a temporary loan 2 years ago, I noticed he hadn't cleared space for me. The passenger seat was cluttered with his gym bag, laptop case, and several empty coffee cups. "Sorry about the mess," he mumbled, haphazardly shoving things into the back seat. "Didn't have time to clean up." The drive to my modest colonial home in Oakwood Heights took exactly 17 minutes. Cameron spent 16 of them on his phone, arranging details for his meeting while I sat silently, each bump in the road sending sharp twinges through my newly reconstructed knee. When we arrived, he pulled into my driveway but kept the engine running. "Do you need help getting inside?" I asked, attempting a weak joke to mask my disappointment. Cameron looked up from his phone with a distracted expression. "What? Oh, you'll be fine, right? The walker is in the trunk. I really need to prep for this meeting." "Of course," I replied, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. "I understand." As I struggled to maneuver out of the low-sitting car, with my walker, Cameron's phone rang again. By the time I had both feet on the ground, he was deep in conversation about quarterly projections and market analyses. "Hey, Mom," he called through the half-open window as I laboriously made my way toward my front door. "Vanessa might drop by tomorrow to check on you. Got to run." Before I could respond, he had backed out of the driveway, leaving me alone with my walker, my pain, and the dawning realization that I had raised a son who couldn't spare 5 additional minutes to ensure his mother made it safely into her home after surgery. I stood there, leaning heavily on my walker, watching his taillights disappear around the corner. The weight of 3 decades of similar moments suddenly pressed down on me more heavily than my arthritic joints ever could. This was my son, the little boy I had nursed through countless fevers, the teenager whose college tuition I had paid by working 2 jobs after his father left us, the young man whose first apartment security deposit came from my retirement savings. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Abernathy, noticed me standing there and hurried over. "Eleanor, should you be out here alone? Let me help you inside." As this kind woman, not even a close friend, just a neighborly acquaintance, helped me into my house and got me settled with my medications, ice pack, and phone within reach. I felt something shift inside me. A lifetime of making excuses for Cameron's behavior suddenly seemed absurd in the face of Mrs. Abernathy's simple kindness. "My son had an important meeting," I explained weakly. Mrs. Abernathy's expression remained neutral, but her eyes told me everything. "I see. Well, I'll check on you this evening. My number is on your fridge if you need anything before then." After she left, I sat in my recliner staring at the family photos arranged on my mantel. Cameron's graduation portrait, his wedding picture with Vanessa, my beautiful grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, who I saw far less frequently than I'd ever imagined possible when I first held them as infants. The pain in my knee throbbed in time with my heartbeat, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest as I finally allowed myself to see the truth I had been avoiding for years. Cameron wasn't going to change. The son I had sacrificed everything for viewed me as nothing more than an occasional ATM and an inconvenient obligation. I reached for my phone and called my lawyer, Thomas Whitaker. Thomas had been a friend since our college days and had handled all my legal matters since my divorce 25 years ago. "Eleanor?" he answered warmly. "How did the surgery go?" "About as well as can be expected," I replied. "But I need to make some changes to my will. As soon as possible." There was a brief pause. "This seems sudden. Does it have something to do with Cameron?" "It has everything to do with Cameron," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I've been a fool, Thomas, for far too long," Thomas sighed. "I can be there tomorrow morning. Would 10 o'clock work?" "Perfect. And Thomas? Thank you." That evening, as I struggled through my first painful physical therapy exercises, my phone rang. It was Cameron. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How's the knee?" "Painful," I answered truthfully. "How was your meeting?" "Amazing. I think I really impressed Jenkins with my presentation. He hinted that the senior position might be mine by summer." "That's wonderful, dear." "So listen," Cameron continued, not bothering to ask any further about my recovery. "Vanessa and I were thinking about taking the kids to Disney World this spring. Emma's been begging to go, and with the promotion looking likely." I knew what was coming next. The same conversation we'd had countless times before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That sounds lovely," I said, interrupting what would inevitably be a request for just a small loan that would never be repaid. "It would be," Cameron agreed, his voice taking on that cajoling tone I knew all too well. "The thing is, with the down payment on the lake house last year and Emma's private school tuition, I can't help you this time, Cameron." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "What do you mean you can't help?" he finally asked, confusion evident in his voice. "It's not like I'm asking for much, just enough. To cover the flights and maybe the hotel. I'll pay for everything else." Just as he had promised to pay for everything else for the lake house, the BMW, Emma's school tuition, the kitchen renovation, and countless other expenses that had somehow become my responsibility. "I'm on a fixed income now," I explained, though I knew the truth was more complicated. "And with the medical bills from the surgery." "But you've always said your insurance covers most of that," he countered quickly. "And what about the money from Dad's life insurance? You said you were investing that for retirement." The fact that he kept such careful track of my potential sources of funds while showing so little interest in my actual well-being made my next words easier. "I'm not having this conversation right now, Cameron. I'm tired, I'm in pain, and I need to rest." "Mom, you're being ridiculous. It's just a small loan." "Goodbye, Cameron. Give my love to Vanessa and the children." I hung up before he could respond, then turned off my phone entirely, For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, heaving sobs that made my knee throb and my throat ache. I cried for the relationship I had always hoped to have with my son, for the grandmother I wanted to be, for the decades I had spent enabling behavior that had hollowed out my savings and my self-respect in equal measure. By morning, something had crystallized within me, a resolve, hard and clear as diamond. I was still Eleanor Winters, still a mother, still a grandmother, but I would no longer be a doormat or an ATM. Thomas arrived precisely at 10, his familiar Ford sedan pulling into my driveway at the exact moment the grandfather clock in my hallway began to chime. He'd brought breakfast, fresh bagels from Meyer's Deli and coffee from the local roastery we both favored. "You look terrible," he said bluntly as he helped me adjust my leg on the ottoman. "Thank you. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear the day after surgery," I replied dryly. Thomas chuckled. "Your sense of humor is intact, at least. Now, tell me what's going on." As I recounted the events of the previous day, Cameron's behavior at the hospital, the phone call, the years of financial impositions, Thomas listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I knew some of this," he admitted when I finished. "But I hadn't realized the extent. Eleanor, why have you allowed this for so long?" It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself throughout the sleepless night. "Because he's my son," I said simply. "Because I kept hoping that if I just helped him through one more crisis, one more opportunity, one more milestone, he would finally become the man I raised him to be. A man who cares about someone besides himself." Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting a sadness that matched my own. "And now?" "Now I understand that I've been enabling him, not helping him, that by continuously bailing him out, I've prevented him from ever facing consequences or developing responsibility. So what changes?" "Do you want to make to your will?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Cameron as my primary beneficiary." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't seem entirely surprised. "And who would you like to name instead?" "I want to establish educational trusts for Emma and Lucas that Cameron and Vanessa can't access. The remainder should go to the Oakwood Heights Senior Center and the Scholarship Fund at Pinecrest Community College." "The Senior Center?" Thomas questioned. "They were incredibly helpful after Gerald died," I explained, thinking of my late husband. "Their grief support group was the only thing that got me through those first few months. And the Scholarship Fund. Well, education was always important to me." Thomas made notes in his leather-bound portfolio. "What about your house? The investments?" "The house can be sold, with proceeds divided between the trusts and the charitable bequests. As for the investments..." I hesitated. "I'd like to start liquidating some of those now. I have physical therapy to pay for, and I'm thinking about taking that Mediterranean cruise Gerald and I always talked about." A smile spread across Thomas's face. "It's about time, Eleanor. Gerald's been gone for 7 years. He would want you to enjoy life." As Thomas prepared the necessary paperwork, my phone, which I had turned back on that morning, began to ring. Cameron's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. "He'll keep calling," Thomas observed. "I know, and eventually I'll answer. He's still my son, and I still love him, but our relationship is going to change, starting today." By the time Thomas left 3 hours later, my financial future had been completely restructured. The changes to my will would take effect as soon as the documents were filed, and Thomas had already contacted my financial advisor to begin the process of liquidating selected investments. I felt lighter somehow, despite the weight of the decisions I had made. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life and my legacy, ensuring that my hard-earned assets would support causes I believed in and grandchildren I adored, rather than continuing to fuel my son's sense of entitlement. When Cameron showed up unannounced that evening, his expression was a mixture of annoyance and calculation I had seen many times before. "You hung up on me," he said by way of greeting as he let himself in with the key I had given him for emergencies. "And then you ignored my calls all day." "I was busy," I replied calmly. "I had an appointment with Thomas." Cameron's eyes narrowed slightly. "Thomas Whitaker? Your lawyer? What for?" "Just updating some legal documents, post-surgery planning." "What kind of legal documents?" he pressed, an edge of concern creeping into his voice. I met his gaze steadily. "My will, among other things." Cameron's expression shifted, the annoyance giving way to something more carefully controlled. He moved to sit beside me on the couch, his voice softening. "Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. I was stressed about that meeting, but I shouldn't have rushed you. Are you doing okay? Do you need anything?" The sudden show of concern would have warmed my heart just days ago. Now, I recognized it for what it was, a course correction prompted not by genuine care, but by the realization that his financial safety net might be in jeopardy. "I'm managing. Thank you," I said. "Mrs. Abernathy has been very helpful." "Mrs. Abernathy? The neighbor? Mom, you should have called me if you needed help. That's what family is for." I almost laughed at the irony. "Is it, Cameron? Is that what family is for?" He looked taken aback by my tone. "Of course it is. Look, I know I've been busy lately, but—" "You've been busy for years," I interrupted gently. "Too busy to visit unless you need something. Too busy to bring the grandchildren over more than once a month. Too busy to make sure your mother got safely into her house after surgery." Cameron's face flushed. "That's not fair. Vanessa and I both work full-time. The kids have activities, and you know how demanding my position is. Life is demanding for everyone, Cameron. But we make time for what matters to us." He stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. "What did you change in your will?" And there it was, the real reason for his visit, the question that had undoubtedly been foremost in his mind since I mentioned Thomas's name. "That's private," I replied. "Private? I'm your son, your only child. How is your will private from me?" "Because it's my will, Cameron. My decisions about my assets." He turned to face me, his expression incredulous. "You're cutting me out. Of your will? Because I was in a hurry yesterday? That's insane." "I'm making changes that reflect my values and priorities," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the pain flaring in my knee and the ache in my heart. "And this isn't about yesterday. Yesterday was simply the moment I finally faced what our relationship has become." Cameron's face darkened. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means that for years you've treated me like a bank, not a mother. It means that I've enabled behavior that isn't healthy for either of us. It means things need to change." He stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Then his expression hardened. "This is about money, then? Fine. Keep your money. I don't need it." The declaration might have been more convincing if he hadn't called specifically to ask for Disney World funds less than 24 hours earlier. "This isn't about money, Cameron. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I'm a person with my own needs and feelings, not just a resource to be tapped whenever you're overextended. It's about building a relationship based on genuine care, rather than financial convenience." He shook his head, already reaching for his keys. "I don't need to listen to this. You're clearly not thinking straight. It must be the pain medication. We'll talk when you're more reasonable." As he stormed toward the door, I called after him, "Cameron." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "I love you. That hasn't changed and it won't change, but our relationship will." He didn't respond, just yanked the door open and let it slam behind him. I sat in the sudden silence, the echo of the slamming door fading along with the sound of his car engine starting and quickly receding down the street. My hands were shaking, but my resolve remained firm. The next few days passed in a blur of physical therapy sessions, visits from Mrs. Abernathy and a few other neighbors who had organized a meal rotation for me, and pointed silence from Cameron. Vanessa sent a terse text asking if I needed anything, which I politely declined. My grandchildren called once, their sweet voices a balm to my wounded spirit, though I could hear Vanessa prompting them in the background. A week after my surgery, Thomas stopped by with the finalized documents for my signature and the news that the first phase of my investment liquidation had been completed. The educational trusts for Emma and Lucas are established, he confirmed, and the travel agent called. Your cruise is booked for September when your doctor says you'll be fully recovered. I signed the papers with a steady hand, each signature feeling like a declaration of independence. Cameron hasn't taken this well, I imagine, Thomas said as he witnessed my signature on the last document. He's not speaking to me, I acknowledged. But he will, eventually, especially when he needs something. Thomas's expression turned serious. And when that happens? I thought about it for a moment, about the complex tangle of love and disappointment, hope and disillusionment that defined my relationship with my only child. When that happens, I'll be his mother, not his banker. I'll offer emotional support, not financial bailouts. I'll love him enough to let him face the consequences of his choices. And if he never accepts these new boundaries? The question pierced me to my core, voicing the fear that had kept me awake during the long nights since my surgery. Then I'll have to accept that too, I said quietly. But at least I'll know I finally did what was right, not what was easy. As Thomas gathered his papers and prepared to leave, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Cameron, the first direct communication since he had stormed out of my house a week earlier. Need to talk. Financial emergency. Can I come? By tonight? Thomas raised an eyebrow as I showed him the message. That didn't take long, he observed. No, I agreed, a mixture of sadness and determination settling over me. It didn't. I typed a response that would have been unthinkable just 2 weeks earlier. I'm available to talk, but I won't be providing financial assistance. Thomas squeezed my shoulder gently. Stay strong, Eleanor. This is going to be harder than the knee surgery. I know, I replied, but just like the surgery, it's necessary if I want to walk freely again. After Thomas left, I sat in my recliner gazing out at the spring garden Gerald and I had planted together in what now seemed like another lifetime. The tulips were blooming, splashes of red and yellow against the rich black soil. They had survived the harsh winter as they did every year, bending with the cold winds but never breaking. I would be like those tulips, I decided. I would bend with the pain of restructuring my relationship with my son, but I would not break. And perhaps, in time, something new and beautiful would grow from this difficult season of truth and boundaries. My phone chimed again. Cameron's reply. What's that supposed to mean? This is serious, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly, gathering my strength for the conversation to come. When I opened them, I typed, I'm sure it is serious, and I'm here to listen and offer any non-financial support I can. That's what being a mother means to me now. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'll be there at 7. I set the phone down and reached for the physical therapy exercises outline my doctor had provided. Each movement was painful, each stretch a reminder of muscles and tendons learning to work with the new artificial joint. But with each completed repetition, I grew stronger. Just as with each boundary I established with Cameron, I reclaimed a piece of myself that had been lost in years of unhealthy patterns and one-sided sacrifices. By the time the doorbell rang promptly at 7, I was ready, not just for the conversation with my son, but for the new chapter of my life that had begun the moment he rushed me out of the hospital, and I decided to rush him out of my inheritance the same day. Some might call it revenge. I called it reclamation. Reclamation of my resources, my self-respect, and perhaps, if we could both learn from this painful lesson, my relationship with my son. The doorbell's chime echoed through my quiet house at precisely 7 o'clock. Cameron had always been punctual when he wanted something. I took a deep breath, adjusted my leg on the ottoman, and called out, "It's open." He entered with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted his welcome, his tall frame filling the doorway momentarily before he crossed to where I sat. He looked exhausted, I noticed, dark circles under his eyes, hair slightly disheveled, his normally immaculate button-down shirt wrinkled at the cuffs. "Mom?" he began, dropping into the armchair across from me. "Thanks for seeing me." As if I had been the one to initiate our week of silence, as if he were doing me a favor by appearing on my doorstep. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "You said you wanted to talk." Cameron ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from his childhood when he would confess to breaking a neighbor's window or failing a math test. "Look, I know things have been tense since your surgery. I wasn't as attentive as I should have been. I get that." I didn't respond, simply waiting for him to continue. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The thing is, we're in a bit of a situation. The lake house, there's an issue with the property taxes. They reassessed the value, and we owe significantly more than we budgeted for." "I see," I said, still offering nothing more. Cameron's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for the right words among the familiar furnishings. "It's just a temporary cash flow problem. The bonus from my promotion will more than cover it, but that won't come through until July." "And the amount you need?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't be providing it. 17,000, he replied, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it sounds like a lot, but it's actually a good investment opportunity for you too. The property value is already up 12% from when we bought it. Once we sell it—" "When do you plan to sell it?" I interrupted. He blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "Well, not immediately. Maybe in a few years when the market peaks. But eventually, and then of course we'd pay you back with interest." The familiar pattern unfolded exactly as I'd expected. A temporary loan that would stretch indefinitely. A repayment plan tied to some future event that would never quite materialize. An investment opportunity that benefited only one party. "I can't help you with this, Cameron," I said firmly. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion. "Can't or won't?" "Both," I replied. "I don't have that kind of liquid cash available anymore, and even if I did, I wouldn't give it to—" "You!" Cameron straightened in his chair, his confusion morphing rapidly into indignation. "You don't have it available? What does that mean? What about your investment accounts?" The fact that he knew the specific structure of my finances, information I'd never directly shared with him, confirmed how calculating his approach to our relationship had become. "I've made some changes to my financial arrangements," I explained calmly. "I'm using those funds for my medical expenses, physical therapy, and a cruise I've booked for September." "A cruise?" he repeated incredulously. "You're going on a cruise, while I'm about to lose a property because of a tax bill?" "You won't lose the property because of a tax bill, Cameron. You might lose it because of financial decisions you and Vanessa have made. There's an important difference." He stood abruptly, pacing the few steps my small living room allowed. "This is about the will, isn't it? You're punishing me for being busy, for having a life that doesn't revolve around you." The accusation stung, despite my resolve. Was that how he saw our relationship? As me demanding his constant attention, rather than the bare minimum of consideration? "This isn't about punishment," I said quietly. "It's about recognizing reality. For years, I've supported you financially in ways that have prevented you from developing true independence. That stops now because it isn't healthy for either of us." Cameron snorted, an ugly, dismissive sound. "So now you're my therapist as well as my judge, deciding what's healthy for me?" I'm your mother, I replied, my voice steady despite the pain his words caused. And I love you enough to stop enabling behaviors that are hurting you in the long run. Enabling? He sputtered. Is that what Thomas told you? That you're enabling me by helping your only son when he needs it? By being a supportive parent? There's a difference between support and bailouts, I said. Between helping and enabling. I've crossed that line too many times. Cameron's face flushed dark with anger. So what exactly did you change in your will? Since you're so concerned about my healthy behaviors, why don't you tell me what you've done? I had no obligation to share the details, but perhaps transparency would help him understand the finality of my decision. I've established educational trusts for Emma and Lucas that will cover their college expenses. The remainder of my estate will be divided between the Oakwood Heights Senior Center and a scholarship fund at Pinecrest Community College. The color drained from his face as quickly as it had risen. You're not serious. I am entirely serious. You're cutting me out completely? Your only child? For what? Some random seniors and college kids you don't even know? I'm ensuring my grandchildren's education and supporting causes that matter to me, I corrected him. And Cameron, this was never about the money itself. It was about recognizing that our relationship had become transactional, that you only called or visited when you needed something from me. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In some ways, perhaps he was. The mother he had known for decades, the one who said yes to every request, who emptied her accounts to fund his lifestyle, who accepted the scraps of his attention with grateful smiles. That woman was gone. You can change it back, he said finally, his voice somewhere between a demand and a plea. Whatever point you're trying to make, I get it. I'll visit more often. I'll bring the kids by every weekend. Just call Thomas and change it back. The cow. Bargaining was so transparent it would have been comical in any other context. More visits, more access to my grandchildren, but only if I reinstated him as my primary beneficiary. Even now, he viewed our relationship as an exchange of services. The changes have been made, I said softly, and they weren't made on a whim. I want a genuine relationship with you, Cameron, one based on mutual respect and care, not financial dependence. He shook his head, bitter incredulity twisting his features. You know what? Keep your money. Give it all to strangers. See if I care, but don't expect me to pretend this is about anything other than control. You're trying to manipulate me because you're lonely and bitter, and it's pathetic. Each word landed like a physical blow, revealing the ugly truth that perhaps had always lurked beneath the surface. My son didn't respect me. Hadn't respected me for a very long time, if ever. I think you should leave now, I managed to say, my voice remarkably steady given the storm of emotions raging inside me. Gladly, he snapped, already heading for the door. Don't bother calling. To see the kids either. If you don't consider me family anymore, why should they consider you their grandmother? The threat to cut me off from Emma and Lucas, the final manipulation, nearly broke my resolve. For a moment, I almost called him back, almost said I would reconsider, would find a way to help with the tax bill, would undo the changes to my will. But then I remembered the moments after my surgery, when he couldn't spare 5 minutes to help me into my own home. I remembered the calculated way his concern had appeared only after he learned I'd been meeting with my lawyer. I remembered decades of one-sided giving that had hollowed out both my savings and my self-respect. I love you, Cameron, I called after him instead. That hasn't changed. The only response was the slamming of my front door and, moments later, the screech of tires as he pulled away from the curb. I sat motionless in my recliner as darkness fell, not bothering to turn on lamps, letting the shadows gather around, me like old friends. The pain in my knee had intensified with the stress of the confrontation, but I couldn't summon the energy to retrieve my medication from the kitchen. Was I doing the right thing? The question circled my mind like a persistent moth, battering itself against the walls of my certainty. Had I gone too far? Was I, as Cameron suggested, simply being vindictive? Manipulative? Pathetic? The ring of my phone startled me from my spiral of self-doubt. The screen illuminated with a name I hadn't expected. Vanessa. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Eleanor." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I just had a very upsetting conversation with Cameron." "I imagine you did," I replied, bracing myself for another onslaught of accusations and emotional blackmail. "He says you've cut him out of your will entirely, that you're giving everything to charity instead of your family." "Not entirely," I corrected her. "Emma and Lucas will have their education fully provided for through trusts. The remainder will go to causes I believe in." There was a pause, the sound of a door closing on her end of the line. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was lower, more intense. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The lake house was supposed to be our safety net. Cameron's been counting on your inheritance to clear our debts." The admission was so baldly mercenary, it momentarily took my breath away. Not just occasional loans and help with unexpected expenses, but a deliberate long-term strategy of waiting for my death to solve their financial problems. "That was never the purpose of my estate," I said when I found my voice again. "And it's troubling that you and Cameron have been planning your finances around my eventual death." Vanessa made a sound, half laugh, half scoff. "Oh, please, don't act like this is some great revelation. You know exactly how much we've struggled since Cameron took the position at Meridian. The salary looked good on paper, but with the commute, the wardrobe requirements, the client entertainment expenses, we're barely staying afloat." "Those were your choices," I pointed out. "The lake house, the private school, the luxury car, all choices." "Choices we made because you always said you were there for us," she shot back. "Because you practically begged to help with the down payment on the lake house. Because you insisted on contributing to Emma's tuition." A sick feeling spread through my stomach as I recognized the distortion of reality Vanessa was presenting, one that Cameron had no doubt embraced as well. In their narrative, I wasn't the overly generous mother who had sacrificed her own financial security to support their lifestyle. I was the meddling mother-in-law who had pushed unwanted assistance on them, creating a dependence they had never sought. "That isn't how I remember it," I said carefully. "Well, memory is subjective, isn't it?" Vanessa's voice dripped with condescension. "The point is, we've built our lives around certain expectations. Expectations you encouraged. And now you're pulling the rug out from under us without warning." "I'm sorry you see it that way," I replied, knowing no explanation would penetrate the story she and Cameron had constructed to justify their behavior. "But my decision is final." "Then I hope you're prepared for the consequences," she said, ice crystallizing around each syllable. "Cameron's already talking about moving, possibly out of state. A fresh start, he says, somewhere with better opportunities." The threat was unmistakable. Cooperate or lose access to your grandchildren entirely. My heart contracted painfully at the thought of Emma and Lucas disappearing from my life, of missing their milestones, of becoming a distant memory in their young minds. "I would miss them terribly," I acknowledged, emotion finally cracking through my composed facade. "But I won't be emotionally blackmailed, Vanessa. Not anymore." "Blackmail?" she repeated, outrage evident in her tone. "Is that what you think this is? I'm simply telling you how your actions are affecting your son's decisions. He's hurt, Eleanor, deeply hurt by your lack of trust and support." "I'm hurt too," I said quietly. "Hurt that my son rushed me out of the hospital after surgery. Hurt that neither of you seems to value my presence in your lives unless it comes with financial benefits. Hurt that you would use my grandchildren as leverage in this situation." Vanessa's voice hardened. "I'm not using anyone as leverage. I'm being realistic about what happens when families fracture. People move on. They create distance from toxic situations. And I'm the toxic one in this scenario? I couldn't keep the bitter amusement from my voice. You're certainly not behaving like a loving mother or grandmother, she countered. Loving family members don't cut each other off financially when they have the means to help. Loving family members don't measure their relationships in dollars, I replied. They don't visit only when they need money. They don't threaten to move away if inheritance plans change. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. Finally, she sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. I didn't call to argue, Eleanor. I called to see if there was any possibility of working this out before irreparable damage is done. But I can see you're determined to cling to this narrative of victimhood. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss? I asked, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. No, she replied curtly. I think you've made your position perfectly clear. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for several more minutes, before finally forcing myself to stand and make my way painfully to the kitchen for my medication. As I filled a glass with water, I noticed Mrs. Abernathy's porch light flick on next door, followed moments later by a gentle knock at my back door. Eleanor? She called softly. Are you all right? I saw you sitting in the dark. I opened the door to find my neighbor holding a covered dish, concern etched across her kind face. Just a difficult evening, I admitted. Family matters. Mrs. Abernathy, Helen as she'd asked me to call her, nodded with understanding beyond words. I brought over some of my chicken casserole. Thought you might not feel up to cooking with that knee. It was such a simple kindness, so freely, given with no expectation of return. I felt tears welling in my eyes and tried to blink them back. Thank you, I managed. Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? Helen's face brightened. I'd love that. If you're sure you're up for company? I could use the distraction, actually. As we sat at my kitchen table, the casserole warming. In the oven, Helen chatted about neighborhood happenings, Mr. Finley's new puppy that had dug up half his garden, the Johnson's daughter who had been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools, the upcoming community yard sale. You should participate this year, she suggested. Might be a good time to clear out some of those old things in the attic. Start fresh. Start fresh. The phrase resonated through me like the ring of a bell. Wasn't that exactly what I was trying to do? Start fresh with new boundaries, new priorities, a new understanding of my worth beyond what I could provide financially to my son? I think I will, I agreed, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. There's a lot I've been holding on to for too long. Helen smiled, reaching across the table to pat my hand. That's the spirit. Out with the old, in with the new. And speaking of new, I heard from Mary at the senior center that you've booked a Mediterranean cruise for September. How exciting! I hadn't told anyone about the cruise except Thomas and Cameron. The speed with which the news had traveled through Oakwood Heights' senior community would have been alarming if it weren't so amusing. Word travels fast, I observed dryly. Helen laughed. Mary's sister works at the travel agency. Small towns, you know. But tell me about the itinerary. I've always wanted to see Santorini. As I described the ports of call, Barcelona, Nice, Rome, Athens, Santorini, I felt a flutter of excitement that had been absent from my life for far too long. This trip had been a dream Gerald and I had shared, one I had set aside after his death, believing such indulgences were no longer for me. Now, despite the pain of the rift with Cameron, despite the uncertainty about my future relationship with my grandchildren, I allowed myself to anticipate the adventure ahead. You'll need a travel companion, of course, Helen declared as if it were settled. Someone to help with your luggage and take photos of you in all those gorgeous locations. I volunteer as tribute. The offer was so unexpected, so genuinely enthusiastic, that I laughed out loud for what felt like the first time in months. Are you serious? Deadly serious, she confirmed. Walter's been gone 12 years now, and I've never been to Europe. My retirement account is healthy, and I'm not getting any younger. Say yes, Eleanor. It'll be an adventure. The impulsiveness of it appealed to me, a decision based not on obligation or guilt, but on simple joy and friendship. When had I last done anything solely because it brought me pleasure? Yes, I said, surprising myself again. Let's do it. Let's have an adventure. Helen's delighted clap made me smile. As we discussed cabin options and shore excursions, I felt something shift inside me, a loosening of the knot of anxiety that had tightened with every confrontation with Cameron. Whatever happened with my son, life would continue. Friendship, adventure, joy, these were still accessible to me, still mine for the taking if I had the courage to reach for them. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, sunlight filtering through my bedroom curtains in gentle ribbons of gold. I'd slept better than expected, the combination of pain medication, emotional exhaustion, and the surprising uplift of Helen's company and our cruise plans, allowing me to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. My physical therapy session was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I'd been dreading it. The exercises were growing more challenging as my recovery progressed, but today I approached the appointment with a new determination. Each bend of my knee, each carefully executed movement was a step toward the independence I would need for my Mediterranean adventure. "You're pushing harder today," observed Megan, my physical therapist, as I completed a set of leg raises. "Something change in your motivation level?" I smiled through the discomfort. "I'm going to climb the steps of the Acropolis in September. Need to be ready." Megan's eyebrows rose. "Greece? That's amazing, Eleanor, and perfectly timed for your recovery. You should be fully healed by then, though you'll want to take the stairs slowly and maybe use a walking stick for stability on those ancient stones." "I'll have a travel companion to lean on," I told her, thinking of Helen's spontaneous offer. "A neighbor who's becoming a friend." "Even better," Megan approved, guiding my leg through a gentle stretch. "Having a goal like that makes all the difference in rehabilitation. You'd be surprised how many patients improve faster when they're working towards something specific, rather than just getting better in the abstract." The session was still painful, still exhausting, but I left feeling accomplished rather than depleted. On impulse, I stopped at Delman's department store on my way home, a modest local shop that catered primarily to Oakwood Heights older residents. In the women's department, I found myself browsing casual summer dresses, something I hadn't bothered with in years. "Can I help you find something?" asked a sales associate whose name tag identified her as Peggy. "I'm looking for something comfortable but nice for a cruise," I explained. "Mediterranean in September." Peggy's face lit up. "How wonderful. Let me show you our resort wear collection. We just got some lovely linen pieces that would be perfect for the Mediterranean climate." An hour later, I left with 3 new dresses, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and a pair of comfortable walking sandals that somehow managed to look stylish despite their orthopedic features. The purchases had made a modest dent in my newly liquid assets, but the small extravagance felt right, a tangible commitment to my new chapter. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of my house, a sensible mid-range sedan that didn't match any of my neighbors' vehicles. Wondering if Thomas had sent a colleague with additional paperwork, I carefully maneuvered out of my car with my walker and shopping bags. "Mrs. Winters?" The voice came from my porch, where a woman in her mid-30s stood holding a leather portfolio similar to the one Thomas used. Her crisp pantsuit and professional demeanor immediately put me on alert. "Yes?" I replied cautiously, approaching my own front steps with the wariness of someone who might be walking into an ambush. "I'm Audrey Harmon from Parker, Williamson & Reed," she introduced herself, extending a business card. I was hoping we could speak briefly about a family matter. Parker, Williamson & Reed, one of the most prestigious law firms in the Tau City, known for handling high-profile divorces and contentious estate disputes. My stomach tightened with apprehension. A family matter? I echoed, not accepting the card. Yes, she confirmed with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Regarding some recent changes to your estate planning that may have been made under duress or with undue influence. The audacity was breathtaking. Less than 24 hours after my confrontation with Cameron, he had retained an attorney to challenge my mental competence and the validity of my will, a will that had only just been filed. I think you should leave, I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the anger building inside me. Mrs. Winters, I understand this is uncomfortable, but your son is deeply concerned about your well-being and decision-making capacity following your surgery. The pain medication, the stress of recovery, these factors can impact cognitive function. I'm not having this conversation without my own attorney present, I replied firmly. Please leave my property immediately. Ms. Harmon's professional veneer cracked slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing her features. That's certainly your right, but I should warn you that refusing to discuss this matter could be interpreted as further evidence of impaired judgment when we present our case to the court. The implicit threat hung in the air between us. Not just a challenge to my will, but potentially a challenge to my autonomy. A conservatorship proceeding that could strip me of my right to make my own financial and medical decisions. Are you threatening me, Ms. Harmon? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Not at all, she backpedaled slightly. I'm simply advising you of the potential legal avenues available to family members who are concerned about a loved one's capacity. Mr. Winters wants what's best for you. What Mr. Winters wants, I said deliberately, is my money, and he's now willing to legally declare his mother incompetent to get it. You can tell him that not only will I fight any such petition with every resource at my disposal, but this desperate, underhanded tactic has only confirmed that I made the right decision in changing my will. Ms. Harmon's professional mask slipped further. Mrs. Winters, I strongly advise you to reconsider your position. These proceedings can become extremely invasive and distressing, particularly for someone in your condition. My condition, I repeated, anger now fully eclipsing my initial shock, is perfectly sound, both mentally and physically. Now, for the last time, please leave my property before I call the police to report you for harassment. She hesitated, clearly weighing whether to push further, before finally nodding curtly. You'll be hearing from us formally, Mrs. Winters. I suggest you prepare yourself and your legal counsel accordingly. As she walked to her car, I remained standing on my porch, shopping bag still dangling from my arm, walker gripped tightly in my other hand. The confrontation had left me shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. That Cameron would go this far, would actually attempt to have me declared incompetent rather than accept the loss of his inheritance, revealed a depth of entitlement and moral bankruptcy I hadn't known my son possessed. With unsteady hands, I unlocked my door and made my way inside, sinking onto the bench in my entryway as the full weight of what had just transpired settled over me. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore, or a temporary rift that might heal with time and perspective. Cameron had declared war, legal, financial, and emotional, against his own mother. I reached for my phone and called Thomas. Thomas answered on the second ring, his voice shifting from professional to concerned when he heard the strain in mine. Eleanor? What's happened? Cameron has hired a lawyer from Parker Williamson and Reed, I explained, the words tumbling, out in a rush. She was just here, implying they might challenge my competence and seek some sort of conservatorship. Thomas's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know about the seriousness of the threat. Tell me exactly what she said, he instructed, word for word, if you can remember. I recounted the conversation as precisely as possible, including Ms. Harmon's thinly veiled warnings about invasive proceedings and her suggestion that my refusal to discuss the matter could be used against me. "This is outrageous," Thomas muttered when I finished. "But not entirely surprising given what you've told me about Cameron's reaction to the will changes. Fortunately, we have several factors in our favor." "Like what?" I asked, desperate for reassurance. "First, your medical records clearly document your mental clarity throughout your recent treatment. Dr. Reynolds noted specifically in your discharge paperwork that your cognitive function was unaffected by the pain medication." I vaguely remembered the neurological assessment that had seemed routine at the time, the doctor asking me to remember 3 words, perform simple calculations, identify the date, and my location. "Second," Thomas continued, "the changes to your will were made thoughtfully over time, not in a single impulsive decision. We have documentation of our meetings, your clear reasoning for the changes, and the careful consideration you gave to providing for your grandchildren's education." "And third?" Thomas's voice took on a harder edge. "Third, we have evidence of Cameron's financial impositions over the years. Bank records showing transfers, emails and texts requesting money, the co-signing of loans, all of which paints a picture not of a concerned son worried about his mother's mental capacity, but of someone with a vested financial interest in controlling your assets." Relief mingled with sadness as I absorbed Thomas's analysis. He was right. We had substantial evidence to refute any claim of incompetence. But the fact that such evidence was necessary at all, that my relationship with my son had deteriorated to the point of legal battles and character assassination, was a grief all its own. "What do we do now?" I asked. "I'll contact Dr. Reynolds immediately to secure a current assessment of your capacity, standard protocol in these situations. I'll also draft a cease and desist letter to Ms. Harmon regarding her intimidation tactics. And I think we should meet tomorrow to discuss additional protective measures." By the time I hung up, my initial panic had subsided, replaced by a grim determination to defend myself not just against Cameron's legal maneuvers, but against the deeper assault on my dignity and autonomy. The doorbell rang again, sending a fresh jolt of anxiety through me until I peered through the peephole and saw Helen's familiar face. I opened the door to find her holding a small potted orchid, her expression brightening when she saw me. "I thought you might like something pretty for your coffee table," she said, extending the plant. "And I brought some cruise brochures I've been collecting. Hope that's not too presumptuous." The normalcy of her visit, the simple kindness of a neighbor bringing flowers, the excited anticipation of vacation planning, was such a stark contrast to the legal threats and emotional manipulation I'd been facing that for a moment I couldn't speak. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Helen's smile faded to concern. "You look upset." "It's been a difficult day," I admitted, stepping back to invite her in. "Actually, I could use a friend right now." Over cups of tea at my kitchen table, I confided in Helen about Cameron's reaction to being removed from my will and his escalation to legal threats. I hadn't intended to share so much, but once I began speaking, the words poured out. All the years of one-sided giving, the growing awareness of my son's entitlement, the pain of realizing he valued my money more than my presence in his life. "The worst part," I concluded, "is that he's willing to publicly declare me incompetent, to strip me of my independence and dignity, rather than accept that he's not entitled to my savings." Helen listened without interruption, her kind face registering shock, anger, and finally a deep compassion that held no hint of judgment. "What an absolute nightmare," she said when I finished. "I knew something was wrong when I saw that lawyer leaving, but I never imagined it was this serious." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "What can I do to help?" The simple offer, made without obligation or expectation, brought tears to my eyes. "Just this," I said. "Being here, talking about normal things like cruises and gardens, and neighborhood gossip, reminding me there's still a world beyond this mess with Cameron." Helen nodded, understanding perfectly. "Well then, let's look at these brochures. I've marked some excursions I think we should consider. There's a wine tasting in Tuscany that looks divine. For the next hour, we pored over glossy pamphlets depicting sun-drenched Mediterranean ports, ancient ruins, and coastal villages with whitewashed buildings climbing steep hillsides. The planning session couldn't erase the hurt of Cameron's betrayal or the anxiety about the legal battle ahead, but it provided a respite, a reminder that my future held possibilities beyond family conflict. After Helen left, promising to return the next day to accompany me to my meeting with Thomas, I felt steadier, more prepared to face whatever came next. I settled into my recliner with a novel I'd been meaning to read for months, determined to reclaim some normalcy despite the day's upheaval. The phone rang just as I was finding my rhythm in the story. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Grandma?" Emma's voice, small and uncertain, made my heart constrict. "Emma, sweetheart, how are you?" "I'm okay." She didn't sound okay. "Mom and Dad are fighting a lot. About you." I closed my eyes, pained that my grandchildren were being drawn into the conflict. "I'm sorry to hear that, honey. Grown-ups sometimes disagree about things, but it doesn't mean they don't love each other. Or you." "Dad says we might not see you anymore," she continued, her voice wobbling slightly. "He says you don't want to be part of our family." The manipulation was so transparent, so cruel, that for a moment I couldn't respond. Using a child, using my granddaughter, as an emotional pawn was beyond anything I had thought Cameron capable of. "Emma, that's not true at all," I said, finally, keeping my voice gentle despite my anger. "I love you and Lucas very much, and I will always want to be part of your lives. Your dad and I are having a disagreement right now, but it has nothing to do with how much I love you." "Then, why did you take away his money?" The directness of the question, clearly repeating something she'd overheard, broke my heart. "It's complicated, sweetheart, but it's not about taking anything away from your dad. It's about making sure my savings go to things that are important. To me, like your education fund and Lucas's too. I've made special arrangements to make sure you both can go to any college you want when you're older." There was a pause, the sound of movement in the background. "Mom's coming," Emma whispered urgently. "I'm not supposed to be calling you. I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, Emma. So much." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face. The brief connection with my granddaughter had been both a balm and a wound. A reminder of what was at stake in this conflict with Cameron, of the innocent lives being affected by adult choices and adult greed. I slept poorly that night, dozing fitfully between bouts of anxiety about the legal threat and grief over Emma's clandestine call. By morning, the physical and emotional toll was evident in the dark circles under my eyes and the heaviness in my movements as I prepared for my meeting with Thomas. Helen arrived promptly at 9, equipped with a thermos of coffee for the road and a determined optimism that somehow lightened my mood despite everything. "We're going to sort this out," she declared as she helped me into her sensible Subaru. "Thomas is one of the sharpest legal minds in 3 counties, and you're in the right. That counts for something in this world, regardless of what cynics might say." Thomas's office was even more crowded with books and papers than I remembered from my last visit. He greeted us warmly, ushering us into comfortable chairs and offering coffee before getting down to business. "I've spoken with Dr. Reynolds," he began, "and he's scheduled you for a comprehensive cognitive assessment this afternoon. It's entirely precautionary. He has no concerns about your capacity, but having current documentation will strengthen our position considerably." I nodded, resigned to the necessity. "And the cease and desist letter?" "Delivered to Ms. Harmon's office this morning. I've also prepared a formal response to any potential petition for conservatorship, though I'm hoping the preliminary steps we're taking will dissuade Cameron from pursuing that path." Thomas shuffled through some papers on his desk. "There's something else we need to discuss, Eleanor." something I discovered when reviewing your financial records in preparation for this meeting. The gravity in his tone sent a chill through me. What is it? There appear to be several unauthorized transactions from your investment account over the past 2 years. Withdrawals made through the online banking portal totaling approximately $42,000. The room seemed to tilt slightly. That's impossible. I know, Thomas interrupted gently. The timing of the withdrawals coincides with periods when you were hospitalized for your knee issues or recovering at home. The funds were transferred to an account at First National that I've confirmed belongs to Cameron. Helen gasped beside me, her hand finding mine in a gesture of support. He stole from you? The word stole landed like a physical blow. My son, my only child, had not just manipulated me into giving him money. He had actively taken it without my knowledge or permission. Had accessed my accounts during times when I was vulnerable, when my attention was focused on my health rather than my finances. There must be some mistake, I whispered, even as I knew in my heart there wasn't. The pieces were falling into place. Cameron's intimate knowledge of my investment portfolio, his confidence in approaching me for larger sums, his panic when I mentioned changing my financial arrangements. I've already contacted the fraud department at your bank, Thomas continued. They're launching an investigation, but the evidence is fairly compelling. IP addresses matching Cameron's home and office, transfers occurring during his documented visits to help you after your procedures. Help that had apparently included helping himself to my retirement savings while I was sedated or distracted by pain. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it left me momentarily speechless. What happens now? Helen asked when I couldn't. Thomas's expression was grim but resolute. That depends on Eleanor. We can pursue criminal charges for elder financial abuse and fraud. Or we can use this information as leverage to end the conservatorship, threat, and secure a formal agreement protecting Eleanor's autonomy and finances moving forward. Criminal charges. The phrase echoed in my mind, conjuring images of my son in handcuffs, in a courtroom, in a prison cell. Despite everything, despite the magnitude of his betrayal, something in me recoiled from that outcome. I don't want to press charges, I said quietly. Not yet, anyway. But I want this to stop. All of it. The threats, the manipulation, the attempts to control my money. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we'll use this information strategically. I suggest a meeting, you, me, Cameron, and his attorney. We present the evidence of the unauthorized withdrawals and make it clear that any further attempts to challenge your competence or access your finances will result in criminal prosecution. Will that work? Helen asked skeptically. From what Eleanor's told me about Cameron, he doesn't seem like someone who backs down easily. Even the most aggressive individuals tend to reconsider when faced with potential felony charges, Thomas replied. Especially individuals like Cameron, who have professional careers and reputations to protect. The plan had a certain elegant ruthlessness that appealed to the part of me that had been wounded too deeply, too repeatedly, to prioritize Cameron's feelings anymore. Yet beneath the satisfaction lurked a profound sadness that our relationship had deteriorated to this point, to threats and counter-threats, to legal maneuvers and financial investigations. Set up the meeting, I decided. I want this resolved before my cruise in September. Thomas smiled slightly. I heard about that from Mary at the senior center. Greece, is it? Helen laughed. Does everyone in this town know everyone else's business? Pretty much, Thomas admitted. But in this case, that works in our favor. The more people who see Eleanor living her life, making plans, engaging with the community, the harder it becomes for Cameron to paint her as incompetent or vulnerable. The cognitive assessment that afternoon was thorough but straightforward, a series of memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and questions about current events and personal history. Dr. Reynolds, who had known me for years, seemed almost apologetic about the necessity of the evaluation. "This is absurd, Eleanor," he said as he completed his notes. "You're sharper than half my staff, but I understand why Thomas wants this documentation, given the circumstances." "And the results?" I asked, though I already knew I had performed well. "Perfect scores across the board, Doctor," Reynolds confirmed. "I'll prepare a formal report stating unequivocally that you demonstrate no cognitive impairment whatsoever. If this goes to court, which I sincerely hope it doesn't, I'll testify personally." The support from Dr. Reynolds, from Thomas, from Helen, even from relative strangers like the nurses who had witnessed Cameron's behavior after my surgery, created a network of protection around me that I hadn't realized I needed until it materialized. For too long, I had navigated my relationship with Cameron alone, making excuses for his behavior, hiding my hurt and disappointment from others. Now, paradoxically, his most extreme attempt to control me had shattered that isolation, connecting me to a community of people who valued me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. The meeting with Cameron and his attorney was scheduled for the following week, giving us time to compile the evidence of unauthorized account access and complete all medical assessments. In the intervening days, I focused on my physical therapy, on finalizing cruise plans with Helen, on rediscovering simple pleasures like gardening and reading that had fallen by the wayside during years of catering to Cameron's financial needs. Vanessa called twice, each time with a new approach to persuading me to drop the unnecessary legal nonsense and work things out as a family. First, sympathy. Wasn't I lonely without seeing my grandchildren? Wouldn't I rather resolve this privately than air our dirty laundry in legal proceedings? Then veiled threats. Cameron was considering job opportunities in Colorado. Wouldn't it be a shame if distance made it impossible for me to maintain a relationship with Emma and Lucas? I remained polite but firm. The meeting would proceed as planned. All other matters could be discussed afterward. The morning of the confrontation dawned clear and warm, a perfect June day that seemed at odds with the emotional storm gathering on my horizon. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit I hadn't worn since Gerald's funeral, a choice that felt appropriate for the gravity of the occasion. Helen insisted on driving me to Thomas's office, though she wouldn't be attending the meeting itself. "I'll be right outside," she promised, "ready to celebrate when this is over, or to plot our next move if needed." Cameron and Ms. Harmon were already seated in Thomas's conference room when we arrived, both impeccably dressed and wearing expressions of professional neutrality that didn't quite mask the tension underneath. Cameron wouldn't meet my eyes as I took my seat across the table, focusing instead on adjusting his silk tie and shuffling the papers in front of him. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas began, his tone pleasant but authoritative. "We're here to discuss some concerning developments and hopefully to reach a resolution that serves everyone's interests." Ms. Harmon immediately took control. "Yes, our primary concern is Mrs. Winters's welfare and decision-making capacity following her surgery. Mr. Winters has observed behaviors suggesting his mother may be experiencing cognitive difficulties that are affecting her financial judgment." "Interesting," Thomas replied mildly. "We've taken the liberty of addressing those concerns directly." He slid a folder across the table. "This contains a comprehensive cognitive assessment conducted by Dr. James Reynolds, Eleanor's physician. Of 15 years, certifying her mental capacity is unimpaired. There are also statements from her physical therapist, her pharmacist, and 3 nurses who supervised her hospital stay, all attesting to her clarity and competence." Ms. Harmon flipped through the documents, her expression remaining carefully neutral, despite what must have been disappointment at seeing this particular avenue closed. "While this is certainly relevant information," she said after a moment, "cognitive impairment can be subtle and situational. Mr. Winters has witnessed his mother making uncharacteristic financial decisions that seem contrary to her long-established priorities and values." "You mean her decision to stop funding her son's lifestyle?" I interjected, speaking for the first time. "To use her own money for her own needs and wishes?" Cameron's head snapped up, a flash of anger crossing his face before he controlled. That's not. Actually, Thomas cut in smoothly. Let's discuss those financial matters in detail. He opened another folder, this one filled with bank statements, transaction records, and IP logs. These documents show a pattern of unauthorized access to Mrs. Winters's investment accounts over the past 2 years, resulting in withdrawals totaling $42,000. Ms. Harmon frowned, clearly caught off guard by this new information. I don't see how this is relevant to our concerns about Mrs. Winters' capacity. It's relevant, Thomas continued implacably, because the unauthorized access originated from IP addresses belonging to Cameron Winters's home and office. It occurred during periods when Mrs. Winters was hospitalized or recovering from procedures, when she had given her son access to her home to help with her care. The color drained from Cameron's face as Thomas laid out the evidence methodically. Dates, times, amounts, destination accounts. Ms. Harmon glanced at her client with growing alarm as the presentation continued. These actions constitute elder financial abuse under state law, Thomas concluded. A felony carrying significant penalties, including incarceration. Mrs. Winters has not yet decided whether to press criminal charges, but she wanted Mr. Winters to be fully aware of the situation before any further discussions about her mental capacity or financial decisions. The silence that followed was absolute. Ms. Harmon leaned over to whisper urgently in Cameron's ear, but he seemed frozen, staring at the documents spread before him like a man watching his life unravel. I think, Ms. Harmon said finally, that Mr. Winters and I need a few moments alone to discuss this new information. Thomas nodded. Of course. Eleanor and I will wait in my office. Take all the time you need. As we settled into the comfortable chairs in Thomas's private office, I felt oddly calm, emptied out, as if the storm of emotions surrounding Cameron's betrayal had finally passed, leaving only a clear-eyed acceptance of what was and what must be. Are you all right? Thomas asked gently. Yes, I replied, surprised to find it was true. Whatever happens now, at least the truth is out. No more pretending, no more excuses. We waited nearly 40 minutes before Ms. Harmon appeared at the office door, her professional demeanor somewhat frayed around the edges. Mr. Winters would like to speak with his mother, she announced. Alone, if possible. Thomas looked to me for direction. I nodded. That's fine. I'll be right. Outside, he assured me, echoing Helen's earlier promise. Cameron was standing at the conference room window when I entered, his back to the door, shoulders hunched in a posture of defeat I had never seen in my confident, ambitious son. Mom, he said without turning, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. I don't know what to say. You could start with the truth, I suggested, taking a seat at the table. For once. He turned then, his face haggard in a way that made him suddenly look so much like his father that my breath caught. Gerald had worn that same expression of shame and desperation the one time he'd lost our mortgage payment at the racetrack, confessing, through tears, that he'd been gambling in secret for months. I never meant for it to go this far, Cameron said, sinking into a chair across from me. It started small, 1,000 here, 2,000 there, just to cover some unexpected expenses. I always intended to pay it back. The echo of his father's words from 30 years earlier was eerie. But then you needed more, I said, and then more again. He nodded miserably. The lake house was a mistake. We were overextended from the beginning, but I thought with the promotion coming through. Then the property taxes increased, and Emma's school raised tuition, and Vanessa wanted the kitchen renovated. And you thought taking money from your mother's retirement account was the solution? I finished for him. Rather than living within your means or being honest about your financial situation. I know it was wrong, he whispered. I know that now. But at the time, it seemed like the only way to keep everything from falling apart, to keep up appearances. The admission was both vindicating and devastating. I had been right about the transactional nature of our relationship, right about the calculated way Cameron approached me for money. But the reality that my son was so desperate to maintain a lifestyle beyond his means that he would steal from his own mother was even darker than I had imagined. "What happens now?" he asked, an echo of my own question to Thomas days earlier. I studied my son's face, searching for the little boy I had raised, the child who had once brought me dandelions from the yard and called them treasure. He was still in there somewhere, beneath the layers of entitlement and desperation. "That depends on you," I said finally. "I won't press charges on one condition. You get help. Real help for whatever is driving this behavior, whether it's addiction to status, financial mismanagement, or something deeper. And you make amends, not just to me but to your children, who deserve a father focused on their well-being rather than keeping up with the Joneses." Cameron's eyes widened with surprise. Whatever he had expected, further recriminations, legal threats, demands for repayment, it hadn't been this offer of conditional grace. "You would do that? After everything?" "You're my son," I said. Simply, "I love you, even when I don't like you very much. But love isn't the same as enabling, and this is the last time I'll shield you from the consequences of your actions if you don't make genuine changes." He nodded slowly, a glimmer of something like respect entering his expression for the first time in our confrontation. "And the will? The trust for the kids?" "Those remain as they are," I said firmly. "The educational trusts ensure Emma and Lucas have opportunities regardless of your financial decisions. The charitable bequests reflect causes I believe in. These aren't punishments, Cameron. They're just my choices about my own resources." After a long moment, he nodded again. "Okay, I don't like it, but I understand, and I'll get help. I promise." Whether that promise would be kept remained to be seen, but it was a start, a small step toward whatever new relationship might be possible between us. As we left the conference room to rejoin Thomas and Ms. Harmon, Cameron surprised me by offering his arm for support, a gesture both practical given my still recovering knee and symbolically significant after weeks of conflict. The formal resolution was anticlimactic after the private conversation, a signed agreement that Cameron would withdraw any challenge to my competence or financial autonomy, attend financial counseling, and refrain from any unauthorized access to my accounts. In return, I would not pursue criminal charges for the past unauthorized withdrawals, though I stopped short of promising to forgive the financial debt. "She's being more than generous," Ms. Harmon told Cameron when he hesitated over this last point. "I strongly advise you to sign." He did, his signature landing shakily beside mine on the document that formally ended his attempt to control my assets, but potentially began a healthier chapter in our relationship. Outside Thomas's office, Helen was waiting anxiously, relief flooding her face when she saw my calm expression. "All good?" "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Not perfect, but moving in the right direction." Cameron, who had followed me out, extended his hand to Helen. "You must be the neighbor Mom mentioned, the cruise companion." "That's me," Helen confirmed, shaking his hand with cautious politeness. "Though I'm also the nosy neighbor who noticed when your mother was sitting alone in the dark after surgery and decided to check on her." The gentle rebuke wasn't lost on Cameron, whose face flushed slightly. "I'm glad she has good neighbors," he said after a moment. "Better neighbors than... She's had a son recently." The admission seemed to cost him, but it was another small step toward whatever healing might be possible. 3 months later, as Helen and I boarded the cruise ship that would carry us across the Mediterranean, I received a text message from Cameron with a photo attached. Emma and Lucas stood beside him in front of a modest apartment building, all three smiling and holding a hand-painted sign. Bon voyage, Grandma. See you when you get back. The caption explained that they had moved from the lake house to the apartment, part of Cameron's financial recovery plan developed with the counselor he was seeing weekly. Vanessa was noticeably absent from both the photo and the message, a separation Cameron had mentioned during our cautious, gradual reconnection over recent weeks. As the ship pulled away from the dock, I stood at the railing watching Barcelona recede in the distance, the salt breeze catching at my hair, Helen chattering excitedly beside me about the shore excursions we had planned. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Not just the physical distance from Oakwood Heights to Spain, but the emotional distance from the woman who had sat in a wheelchair at Pinecrest Memorial Hospital, waiting for a son who couldn't spare 5 minutes to help her inside. That woman had valued herself primarily as a mother, a provider, a source of financial support for a child who had long since grown into an adult. She had measured her worth by what she could give, rather than who she was. The woman standing on this ship's deck, with new friends and new adventures awaiting her, had reclaimed her identity beyond those roles, had learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary, that helping wasn't the same as enabling, that love could exist alongside accountability. My relationship with Cameron remained fragile, a work in progress that might strengthen or might falter as he confronted the hard truths about his choices and priorities. My relationship with my grandchildren was cautiously rebuilding, with video calls and weekend visits gradually restoring the connection that had been threatened during the worst of the conflict. But my relationship with myself, that had undergone the most profound transformation of all. I had learned to value my own needs, to plan for my own joy, to allocate my resources according to my own priorities rather than someone else's expectations. As the shoreline disappeared and open sea stretched before us, I smiled at Helen, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Ready for our adventure?" "Absolutely," she replied, linking her arm through mine. "Though I hope you realize this is just the first of many. I'm thinking Alaska next summer, or maybe Japan in the fall." I laughed, delighted by the possibilities stretching before us. "One adventure at a time," I counseled. "Let's see what the Mediterranean has to teach us first." Whatever those lessons might be, I would face them as this new version of Eleanor. Winters, a woman who had discovered at 64 that it was never too late to set boundaries, to stand firm in your truth, to rush yourself out of dynamics that diminished you. A woman who had found, in the aftermath of being rushed from a hospital, the courage to rush her son out of her inheritance and herself into a life of authentic connection, joy, and self-respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.